for De Anza College. I used to be a classroom teacher, middle school, high school, and I also TA'd for some of the community colleges. Oh, sorry, De Anza in particular. And all of that collective experience has really, shown me some patterns in behavior in terms of motivation and success, and how students really become their best selves, right? And today is about leadership, and everyone's going to have a different idea of what that is based on their culture, their influences. But from what I've seen, in that journey towards that future self, and you'll know what I mean in a little bit, the imposter syndrome often comes up, and it's not limited to one particular gender, although we do see it more often in women, particularly women of color. And so, but everyone will sometime experience this at some point in their life, or at least a part of it. Okay, so going on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about actually two things. So yes, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome first and foremost, but I honestly can't talk about that without this other theory called identity-based motivation. And so I want to make sure we have like a framework and a place to kind of situate all of these concepts. So I'm going to talk about that because my talk is rooted in students, right, and also applicable to leadership, and I'll tie that in as well. We need to talk about identity-based motivation. And then if we have time, hopefully, we'll do some breakout for discussion, and then share out our Q&A. Okay, all right. Bear in mind that if you are going to use the chat during this talk, I probably won't see it. I'm going to be really into this. So Adrian or Helen, if there's an important or relevant comment that you'd like me to address, I would like some help with that, please. So here we go. So identity-based motivation comes from a researcher, social and behavioral psychologist, actually, Daphne Oyserman. So it's important because as I advise students, right, because we're all about looking at that goal, looking at what our future could shape out to be. So we're preparing as much as we can right now by going to classes. We're thinking about the courses, the things that we're reading, and hopefully thinking about how this is going to affect us in the future, right? So, but there are three important pieces to this, and imposter syndrome definitely goes into really the third part, but we need the other two to understand the whole parts. So time as distance, language in general, how we talk about concepts actually reveal who we are as a person, and in many ways, our beliefs in how we perceive the world. So what I noticed over time, and definitely at San Jose State, is when we do advising, or even our advising tools, it's all using the language of time. But not just like, okay, you gotta graduate now or later or whatever. It's really more about like time as like a physical space, like the endpoint is a physical location. And although maybe some of you are like, okay, yeah, I want to work for Google, that is a physical location, great. But between you now and you later, there is still this time, right, that's in between. And so, and the thing that really keep me into this is the fact that a lot of students, when they are very nervous about their planning, they always say these things. I don't want to be behind. Like, behind whom? And who are you racing? And then the other piece is I want to graduate on time, but it's also like, there's, what does that mean, right? The other piece, when it comes to being motivated to continue your journey, to continue your growth, to do well in school, to continue, even after that really difficult midterm, right, is, in a sense, my mindset. You probably heard about growth mindset by Carol Dweck. And it's really this idea of your perception of difficulty. Now, for some people, an easy task really means like it equals, I knew it, everything comes naturally, it's so easy, it must be meant for me. Whereas the more difficult, challenging tasks, for some people, when they interpret that, Math. I hate math because it's so hard. I really dislike writing. Therefore, I'm never going to be a good writer. And so, but that has to do with mindset, right? The perception of what that difficulty for us means. And I always tell my students there's a difference between feelings and facts, right? The feeling is, this is difficult, I hate it. But the fact is, like there are things you can do to improve upon that, right? Depending on your resources, such as time. So this is definitely going to roll back into the imposter syndrome, and I'll make that connection later. So I forgot, there was one more, perception of difficulty, my bad. Time is distance. Oh, future self, sorry, I guess I skipped that. So future selves. So according to Oysterman, as we're on this time journey going towards reflection and development, we go through these challenges, but all the while, we are probably thinking of, that sort of goal, hopefully, in terms of if that goal is visible, like maybe I just want to be successful. It's pretty nebulous. Or I want to be a software engineer. I want to be, head of human resources one day. I want to be, the main librarian, right, for, San Jose Public Library. All of those things. Like so according to Daphne, who we're talking about with time-based motivation, if you can see it, right, if you can see the clearer that goal is for you, the easier it will be to see that path towards it, right? And the easier it'll be for you to be motivated, because that means you can also hopefully see yourself, that future self. So the positive future self that you want, but there's also, we have our past experiences, and maybe sometimes we've identified people in our lives or situations in our lives that we do not want to, have happen to us, right? So depending on, your communities, for example. So while I was growing up in the Philippines, I immigrated when I was 5, and then I came to San Jose, pretty much lived here all my life, but I lived in East Side. And the word "but" is oftentimes if you're coming from a neighborhood that doesn't have a strong feeling of like urgency for things such as college or other definitions of success, it can be difficult to keep yourself motivated in that sense. So there are like the future selves we don't want will also be part of that, right? It's like the what not to do and then the what to do, right? And this is where imposter syndrome can start coming in. So I'm gonna actually play a video after I explain what it is for a moment. So imposter, the word imposter means that you're a fraud, or a person is pretending to be someone that they are not. Okay, so someone pretending to be a doctor when they don't have the credentials is just one of many very general examples. And so with regards to the 3 ideas of time-based motivation, so time as distance, and then perception of difficulty, and then the last one that I just talked about, which is the future self, all of that can be really complicated by this idea of the imposter experience for a couple of reasons. So one is that, if in that timeline, right, if you're not sure what that goal is, it's really hard to get there. And even more so, if you don't have a lot of role models or a lot of, representation in that industry. So maybe for the women in this group, if you're trying to enter a mostly male, dominated industry, it's gonna feel weird. And you might have some voices telling you that, you're out of place. So all of that are just examples of the imposter really experience. And I actually forgot to do that. So we're trying to shift the language so that it's the imposter experience, not syndrome. And so I'm going to play this. After this video, I'm actually going to ask you to type in something. And as you're listening, please let me know, like, what is one word that kind of stands out as they're talking about their experience that represents the imposter experience as you understand it, okay? And I'll ask that again later. So here we go.
There's this really pivotal scene in the Thanksgiving episode of the show Masters of None. Angela Bassett plays a mom. She's a mother to Denise. She turns to her and she says, honey, we're minorities and we have to work twice as hard to get half as far. For me, imposter syndrome, there was never one big moment. It was all kind of like smaller moments. One of the first ones I felt was, I went to a very diverse high school. There was like Latinos, Black people, Asian people, Indian people. And I ended up going to college in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to this liberal arts college. I was there on a scholarship. And I remember my first day of campus. It was a sea of white people. And I was so surprised. And I just thought the world was like my high school. I never felt such a lack of diversity. It was really shocking to me, and I felt insecure. I think I worked hard because I wanted to convince myself that I belonged there.
To me, imposter syndrome is a person who never takes in their successes and always feels like they're waiting on the next shoe to drop or waiting on somebody to find them out. When I started my company, Maybe, which is a stationery company for women of color, I remember hitting these really big milestones. And one of them was I was featured in Essence magazine 6 months into starting my business, and I could never take that in. I could never say, you know what, this happened because I was bold enough to reach out to the magazine. This happened because I started this company from scratch. It was never about what I did. It was about, well, maybe it was just the universe, but it wasn't about my hard work, dedication to making that happen.
My first paid internship was a nonprofit in DC, and it was for an internship program for my college and other colleges in California, and also had a couple Ivy League schools involved with it. I was one of maybe 5 students that had a paid internship, and there were about 200 students in the program. I kept telling myself that I didn't deserve to have a paid internship. The Ivy kids didn't have a paid internship. It didn't make sense to me, despite having worked before and being a politics major and being in DC where politics is such a big thing. I just told myself that it was like kids who I felt were more qualified or deserved it more than I didn't have the same experience that I had.
Once I started becoming a manager and leading teams and being, the head of departments and things like that, more often than not only am I the only woman, but I'm the only person of color.
When you're a Black woman, you don't get to be mediocre. You don't get to walk into a place and say, you know what, I'm just gonna be all right today.
I think Black women are taught that we are not deserving, as much as I hate to say that, and I think that it's stuck with me, unfortunately. I work hard, and consciously I feel that I'm deserving of things, but subconsciously I don't feel that way. I attribute everything to luck as opposed to just attributing it to me.
I think imposter syndrome is something that as women of color, we're always gonna come across, and it's really, how do you handle it? Feeling alone, feeling like a fraud, feeling like, wait, how did I get here? Do I deserve to be here?
And there's pressure as a Black woman to always be strong, to always be fearless, to always have this hardened exterior, because if we show any part of ourselves that is actually human, then that makes us weak, or that makes us less valuable.
I have to keep telling myself that everyone does not necessarily know more than me or deserve to be here any more than I do.
These are things that I have to remind myself every single day, because if I don't, I'll fall back into this place where it's like, okay, wait, what happens when somebody doesn't think I'm good enough? Or am I actually good enough?
There's that old saying, fake it till you make it. And I just kind of try to do that, until I realize I'm not faking it anymore. I'm just slaying it.
Okay. All right, in the chat box, go ahead and locate that again. Just curious, what is one word that represents the imposter experience as you understood it through the video, or maybe even your own experience? Just one word, if you can just put that in the chat as a. I'm sorry? Oh, I thought I heard someone talk. So let me just see. So as a former teacher, getting students information, like what they're understanding is really important to me. So I'm seeing invisibility, doubt, guilt, self-doubting, lack of self-esteem, fear, not being enough, self-doubt, definitely. Social fitting, okay. Maybe in the sense of like whether or not you belong in that particular place of success for you, inefficiency, okay, lack of confidence, yeah. So, and actually I just turned off my, okay. So you can continue on and type in any other words that, might actually, that you feel works for this. So, as I was doing more research and the more students I came across, a lot of it had to really do with these terms, and you heard them. And so words such as not good enough, even though they burn themselves out, to pretty much nothing, trying to be the best they can be, undeserving, and that even if they work their butts off, they don't talk about how their mastery of that content or whatever that experience was the reason why they deserve it. It was just that they don't deserve it at all because, well, like, why should they? Inadequacy goes into that as well, and luck. I had nothing to do with it. It was fate. I don't know what I did, right? Now, the problem with that is when we allow ourselves, remember, language has a lot to do with how we perceive ourselves and our understanding of like reality, and it shows a little bit about our value systems. All of that language, that mindset really affects, how we behave depending on the situation. So as in the scenario of students, I found that some students who, like women in STEM, for example, in engineering classes, will tell me that like I'm too scared to ask questions. Like, I'm failing this class and I know I could do better. I'm just too scared to ask questions. And I'll ask them, well, what is it? What's keeping you from asking? And they would say, well, it just seems like everybody knows everything already. And no one else is asking questions. And I looked at her, I was like, well, I have a sneaking suspicion that all of you are just are faking it until you make it. And everyone's keeping quiet because no one wants to look bad, right? Like, they don't want to be the one that shows how not imperfect they are, right? But when the truth is, I'm gonna tell you this right now, the truth is all of you are feeling challenges in one way or shape or form, especially now with COVID, and that stress will affect your ability in your classes to demonstrate your competency. So in those assessments, in your essays, in your tests. And so this is not a time to feign perfectionism. This is a time to own it and maybe even create a community to help you through it. Procrastination, I remember, when I was in high school, okay, also in my undergrad, I went to San Jose State, did English and psychology, double majored. But I would procrastinate and then attribute that to luck, more so because I was too scared to kind of face the assignment, and I would put it off and put it off. And so the fear of failure was part of that. So I see a lot of students who just procrastinate, knowing that they'll be okay, kind of, but also so they can say later on that, oh yeah, I got that grade, but I procrastinated. And then I often come back and say, well, imagine how much better you could be if you didn't procrastinate and actually allowed yourself the opportunity to get the most out of that assignment, to get the most out of that class. Really just validating that it's okay to try. It's okay to be successful, and it's okay to own that success. And the reason is anxiety, depression, right? That self-doubt, that feeling of inefficiency I would imagine, in the sense that you're trying and trying and trying, but it feels like you're not getting anywhere, even though you are, like, you're passing your classes. but there's that voice telling you that it's not enough, right? That is actually a cycle. So there's something called the imposter cycle. And maybe you've lived through this. I definitely have. As someone who's gone through the imposter syndrome many, many times. When I was where can I discuss this? Actually, when I was in the credential program at San Jose State, I was on my way to becoming a teacher, and I was in my English methods class, right? And so I'll start with this little box that says anxiety, self-doubt in the top right. So I would be really, really worried for presentations. And I remember this one presentation, I first procrastinated until I realized that I only had like a day or two to present to all these other brilliant, budding teachers who knew English better than me. English is my second language, and just had more confidence and just seemed like they just knew everything already, right? And so from that, I didn't sleep for probably 2 nights because I was over preparing. So it's almost like I kicked into overdrive, right? And then presentation happens, sigh of relief, it's done. But that little voice, right, of that, it's not enough, you probably didn't do that well, the person after you was much better, even though I was getting praise from, the very same students in the classroom that I did great, right, it didn't matter. But why wouldn't that be valid, right? And so then in that cycle, it kind of ramps up the anxiety for the next, task that might come up, and it just starts itself over again. Now, I'm going to kind of pause here and kind of put ourselves in actually breakout. So a huge part of learning is also processing and talking out your knowledge, your understanding of the content. So I am going to put you in breakout sessions. Part of being a leader is being confident in what you understand and know, and be open to, having mistakes. So I'm going to encourage you to take that risk, right? So imposter syndrome kind of forces this weird perfectionism in us, which keeps us from, risk taking. So I'm going to ask you to take that risk today. So the question is, and in a moment, we're going to put you in these groups, and I will also write the questions in the chat so you can have it, okay? So it is, in what ways can the imposter experience affect behaviors as leaders or leaders in progress, or, discount the or, speak from experience, observation, or refer to the video, okay? So let me just put that, thank you, Adrian, I really appreciate that. So that, again, the question is in the chat box, which you'll have access to when you go into your breakout room. And Adrian, if it's possible, so that they are like no more than 2 to 3 per breakout room, that would be great. That way people have a chance to discuss this a little bit. Okay, so the question again is, in what ways can the imposter experience affect behaviors, right? How can that anxiety or that feeling of not enough, of that feeling of trying really hard but not giving yourself, the credit that you deserve, how does that affect your potential to be a leader? Okay, well, I think that's everyone. Welcome back. After the small group, it would really benefit the group as a whole, right, to learn from your shared experience. And so I'm also actually getting my master's degree in counseling, master's in education with a concentration in counseling, with a certification in trauma-informed mental health, it's really long, and restorative justice practices. And all of what I've learned so far is that, when we think about mental health, right, it's actually more of that sort of feeling of disgruntlement, that feeling of uncomfortableness that can, bloom into something worse, that could get into anxiety and such. And part of that, just one piece of it, is this term called discourse. So I'm sorry, I'm going to add one more piece of information before we share out. Discourse, like discussion, like talking. And again, I talked about language and how important that is to our self-perception, right? Therefore, also our, how our self-efficacy, how whether or not we're good enough and all of that. And so with discourse, the more messages, the more language, the more media that represents a particular idea, for example, leadership. So when we think of leadership, what is the first image that you see? Think about that. What is the first word that you think of? Again, leadership. What is the first experience that you can think of for yourself? Whatever's popping up when you hear the word leadership, images, words, anything, confidence, absolutely. Those perceptions, your understanding, impact, perfect, all of that was shaped somehow by something that you lived through or was exposed to. Okay, so my idea of leadership, for example, is actually leading from behind. I'm not interested in leading at the front, telling people what to do, despite what my student assistant, who's also here right now, tells you. I'm about growing my team so that they can, do it on their own. But I'm prefacing all this because that discourse, that knowledge or perception of what we think about leadership can evolve. Because again, it depends on your experience and what you're exposed to. So when you take the risk of asking a question in your class, or commenting on an idea during a discussion in class or in a meeting, or if you're at work in your working group or whatever, you're part of that discourse. You're showing what it means to be, one, who you are, but two, what it means to be an active person in this conversation of what leadership could look like. Okay, and so I encourage you to share out today. Hopefully, I, and still do, am one of those who have like the voice shakies. It took me a long time to get over myself. Still have that, wherein I know I have a really great idea, and then my body will do this thing where it's shaking, and then it kind of travels into my vocal cords, and then like when I finally, get called on, it sounds like I'm crying, but I'm not. I'm just really nervous. All of that, kind of comes into play. So I just want to acknowledge that, right, and bring that out, and that there's no one way to be. Okay, so I'm going to stop, and I want to hear from you. Tommy, in what ways can the imposter experience affect behaviors of leaders? What have you seen? What, or maybe if you can share your experience, so those of us could learn more from you.
Hello, my name is Yukino.
Hello.
So I like to share a little bit about my experience. So I could kind of relate to the first speaker in the video, but it was like a reversing type of the experience. So I was in the different part of the United States, and then when I was there, like I had a kind of less diverse society. And then so when I went there, first I couldn't speak English at all. So as I'm international student, and then so it was because it was diverse. There was only one international student in the class. So I was like so afraid to speak up. And then when I had a presentation, I was so shaken and it's feeling so nervous. But then when I moved to San Jose, it was totally different. Like everything was everywhere diverse. And then I feel so comfortable. Yeah, and then when I'm speak, like no one pointing out my pronunciation or my accent or asking where are you from, right? Yeah, so but through all the experience, I think the feeling of the fear is not only bad thing, because when I was in the different part of the states, like I could make an effort, like so much effort, like study about pronunciation and all the English grammars and those stuff. And then when I come to San Jose, like I was so comfortably speaking English. So yeah, that was kind of, like I think the experience or fear has the two sides. And then if we could focus on the positive side, we can make an effort and then, like turning it to like positive effect, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and for me, hi everyone, I'm Charlene. And to add up on what Yukino just shared about the international student part, and also what I share in my group, is that I first got the like email from the San Jose State saying that I am accepted to the MBA program this year, and which I just started. And so I was like super excited, like I actually dream of it like for many times, that I seriously got it. And so that finally realized I did it, right? So first, like, I'm so proud of myself, like able to do it. But then after times, like through the group projects or the assignments and the in-class discussion, everything going on, and then I feel like, oh, am I actually good at this? Is it really what I can do? And then, like, can I fulfill it at the end of the program, or what I felt during anything that can meet the standard of the professor also, right? And so every time when the grade came out, I don't know if you guys do it, but I do very frequently, is to go on the campus, and then under the grade, you can actually see a average of how everyone do on the yeah. So I honestly go on it like every time I saw my grade post out, and I was like comparing myself to others, and feel like, oh, I actually got like higher place in this assignment, or oh, I actually failed it, and then I feel I'm like the last person, or so in between, and so just lots of comparing, and then kind of stressing out myself in some point. Yeah.
I want to add something, forgive me, before the next speaker shares. It's interesting that you mentioned the whole comparing ourselves to others, and that's part of that whole time, like identity-based motivation, right? Because maybe you just don't know what is acceptable, right? And like I find that especially with students I work with who are first generation, they don't know what it means to be a student in a classroom. They don't know what is appropriate, and nobody wants to stick out and look like they don't belong, right? So if no one's asking questions, I'm not going to ask questions. If everyone's complaining about a professor, I'm going to maybe talk negatively about that professor too, because as humans we want to feel like we belong. And so also with Yukino, right, you were not feeling comfortable because you were in your context were othered, right? They even asked you where you're from, right? Whereas here, you saw how others interacted, maybe other international students, as examples of how they acted and how okay it was to ask questions, or how to engage, right, with your student community, right? And that's so important, which is why I'm telling you, like, the idea of discourse, that's ever evolving, but we don't change that if we don't be a part of that conversation, if we don't put ourselves out there to show others that like, hey, I'm also a student, I'm an MBA student, I'm a teacher and a teacher credential, all of that, and this is what it looks like. I'm confused, I'm freaking out. And you'll find that others probably are too, and that's okay, because that's actually what's normal. Anyone else want to share?
Actually, maybe I'm gonna share a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to add also to this part, that sometimes lack of knowledge, lack of what is expected from you is a big thing, and it takes time to understand and figure out. Like, for example, when I came here, even a small talk, like what is expected from you? Because in my culture, we don't do small talk. We are very like to the point. And here I come to the grocery store and people just randomly start talking to me, and like, I don't know what should I tell? Should I tell like my whole life story, or just to touch a little bit on that? And I was kind of shy a little bit then, and then I just thought, okay, like, I have to learn this small talk. I have to start talking and doing something. So when I went next time to the grocery store, I was like, I started the conversation, like, I just, okay, like, if nobody's gonna do it for me, and just to figure it out how it works. And I felt so good after that. It was like a milestone, little milestone towards something more. And little by little, this small talk is no issue for me now. And of course, to add, like, there are a lot of inner decisions we make on our daily basis, like how to work on this imposter syndrome, and this feeling of not being enough. So it's a lot of things are in our heads. It's just like, just knowing that no one is going to do it for you, and yeah, just making right decisions in your head and moving forward.
And actually, that you are helping me transition, so I really appreciate that. I'm just looking at the time. So really the wrap up, because I actually have an advising appointment right after this at 2:30, so I'm going to try to keep us on time. So remember that our self-perception definitely affects, who our behavior, right? If we feel like we're not enough, we're going to act like that. And I know it seems like a weird paradox. It's like, so where do you start to change that? Because we can have a tendency to hold us back. Because let's say you have a community that just doesn't understand your need to be a teacher. That was my case. My parents hated the fact that I wanted to be a public school teacher. But that's what I felt like was really important. So that lack of support contributed to my anxiety, and I felt like I had to succeed no matter what, just to prove people wrong. But that was me. That was a me thing. I made a choice not to hold myself back. But there are ways to combat that imposterism. First thing would be to identify it, right? In those moments where you're feeling like you're not enough, sit with that. Just sit with it and thinking, okay, what did I just tell myself? I told myself that I'm not enough, that I don't belong here. Okay, what started that train of thought? And then, talk to people that you trust and who know you and love you, or maybe a colleague that, you're just work buddies with, and give you, and have them like talk you through, have them help you talk through some of the feelings of inadequacy. Because sometimes you need someone from the outside to show you the facts and not the feelings, right? Because the feelings is often mired in like the muck and the negative self-talk. So to change that script, that discourse in your head, you need some help to fix that. So in a way, yeah, you actually do need other people, but you also have to be able to identify that that's happening. The other one is be open for feedback. I think once I allowed myself to just be a lifelong learner and not feel so pressured to do things correctly the first time, I really owned not just my successes, but also my mistakes. Though I'm pretty sure you noticed that as I was talking, I talked about like, yeah, all of this, was from experience. All of the things I'm bringing to you now, I can validate because of, my decades long of teaching. But you don't know how hard those lessons had to be, I had to experience them in order to really get to this point. And so being open for feedback to failure and feeling like, okay, I'm going to do it better next time is probably one of the most powerful things you can do as someone with imposterism. Look at challenges as opportunities. So especially with our students, remember earlier I said, if the class is difficult, that must mean it's not for me, right? I get that a lot with my my students. So I also work with students on academic probation or major probation, and they'll say, yeah, math has always been hard for me, or I don't like math. So again, feelings, feelings, feelings. But I look at their grades and it's like, boom, 3.8 GPA, like really high scores on AP exams and all that. And I look at them and I'll tell them, like, I don't understand. You're telling me you're feeling this way, but this is what I see as facts. Your data shows me you belong here. And it's a really difficult it's actually really difficult to get into our college because it's the College of Engineering. So I'm not sure what you're talking about. And then they come back and say, well, the classes are really hard. I don't think I can do that. And I'll tell them, like, well, why would you choose a major or go to school when you already know everything, right? When you have nothing new to learn. That's not what this is about, right? The challenge stretches you. The challenge grows you. And that's how you start to feel more confident and less of an imposter, because you can look back and say, I've conquered that. I'm not afraid of it anymore. So I am going to kind of stop there in case any of you have questions. I will literally leave at 2:30 because I have an appointment. But in the time that we have, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Actually, I'll look at some of the responses, but if you want to speak up and share or ask, feel free to do so.
And would you mind sharing your contact information in the chat in case anyone wants to follow up with you later?
Absolutely. I'm actually going to start doing a series on like learning theory in our Success Center and how how your brain actually learns. So I'm really into the brain and motivation and success. So yeah, feel free to email me. It's like the first week of October already, but it's gonna happen in October. So yeah, and even if you're not in engineering, in engineering, I believe you can sign up for it. So just email me, let me know you're interested.
Yes, thank you so much, Allery. This was a really wonderful conversation on such an important topic, and you were able to share a lot of insights and tips and just get everyone engaged in the conversation. And for everyone who's attending with us today, just a reminder, we did record the session and we will be sharing out the recording with everyone who attended, so you'll be able to go back and revisit, and Allery has also offered to share the presentation as well. So you will be able to get access to that and go back to the material. But thank you all for attending today. And thank you so much, Allery, for your time and your experience on this topic. And for everyone who is joining us for the remainder of the day, I'm going to share the schedule for the rest of the afternoon sessions. We hope you can make it. We still have 2 more blocks of breakout sessions with some really wonderful presenters coming up as well. Thank you again, Allery.
Yeah, no problem. I'm actually going to put in first like an assignment if you're feeling like, oh, how am I going to get started? So your assignment will be in your next class or meeting or something that involves other people, ask a question. That's it. Ask a question. A question. Your questions tell you to what depth that you're paying attention and understanding whatever it is that they're talking about, and also that you care. So questions are really, really important. It's not the answer, knowing the answer to the question, it's actually the question that's more important. So good luck, y'all. I will see you, and I'm gonna go. Bye.
Thank you so much.